Okay, so I think in the interest of time, we'll get started, and then if people join, then they'll just pop in here. So welcome everybody to our webinar today. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful December mild day as we're heading into the holidays. My name's Kathy Arsenault. I'm the practice consultant for the Association of New Brunswick Licensed Practical Nurses. And it's really great to see so much interest here. There's about 20 of you online so far, so it's great to see so much interest. So our topic today is going to be on social media and professionalism. And this webinar is going to be replacing a previous webinar that we did on this last year. We decided we were going to update this webinar because it's just an area where we've seen a real increase in some of these professional misconduct complaints that we might receive. So it's sort of become an area of concern for us for sure. And our presence on social media is really tied to our professionalism, and how we conduct ourselves on social media really impacts the public's perception of us as nursing professionals. We've certainly been seeing more of this within our own membership, and so we felt it was just important that you were aware of what can happen when you blur those lines of your professional boundaries, and that the impact that that can have on how you're perceived in the public eye as a self-regulating professional. I was recently at a conference and it was very clear that this lack of professionalism was not just a nursing issue. It really is happening across all professional networks. And nobody's really sure why this is. So there's been a little bit of talk of it being perhaps a bit generational, and that might be true to some degree because many of us have certainly been brought up in kind of this age of this technological boom. But we can't just blame it on one generation because we know that we see this unprofessionalism in many different age groups. And there's also been a bit of talk of it being due to maybe these hidden curriculum pressures. And that's really when you see new grads coming out and they're trying to follow best practice and be professional. And then they get into the workplace and people start making comments like, oh, you can tell that you're new here. And then they start falling into some of these bad habits that's being displayed to them by others because that's what they're seeing, and they don't want to be embarrassed, and they just kind of want to stay with the crowd. But in any case, whatever the reason is, it's really become kind of a societal issue, and we need to revisit the importance of our professional presence as self-regulating professionals. So we know that access to social media is just a click away. So we know we all have smartphones, we have tablets, we have Apple Watches, you name it, we've got it. And we use all these devices to access Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat and Instagram, and I'm sure there's many more that I'm not even aware of. And we do this just by the tap of our fingers. So these communication platforms were really initially used to stay in contact with people in our personal lives, but then it gradually started entering into our professional lives, and it became a way for people to connect with different colleagues and organizations. And all of this has really led to issues with people having difficulty separating their personal lives from their professional lives. Some of these boundaries have started to become blurred, and then privacy and confidentiality has become a really big concern. And then that leads to our biggest concern today is when we're seeing cases of defamation and professional misconduct. So being professional is critical in order for nursing professionals to have credibility and to maintain that positive image to the public that we want to keep. And how you're displaying yourself on social media really influences how others are going to perceive you. And that can be beneficial, but it can also be really damaging. So when we're talking about this professionalism, it really is described as, what's your conduct like at work? How are you showing up for work every day? It's your appearance, it's your attitude, and it's your interactions with other people. And that includes your conduct on social media as well. Because as nursing professionals, we are expected to interact with a lot of different people and groups, our colleagues, employers, a lot of different organizations. And because we interact with so many different people, it's really critical that we maintain that high level of professionalism at all times, especially during times of stress and chaos. And this, I really feel, is one of those times for us here in New Brunswick, because we certainly understand that there's a lot of frustration among our members regarding wages and feeling respected by other colleagues, and maybe the term nurse itself. But when we're displaying anger and degrading other people and sharing some of those questionable tongue-in-cheek photos that we see, and we start attacking other organizations, it really doesn't help our cause. So it really makes you look unprofessional, and those unprofessional actions by a few can really have a big impact on everyone. So this was a study, or a survey I should say, done, it was a Canadian survey done by Insights West, and it listed nursing as the second most respected profession in Canada. So you can see that 91% of the population has a very positive image of nursing professionals. And we're right up there with the firefighters, and so we certainly want to keep it that way. And in order for us to be positively viewed by others, it means that nursing professionals have to maintain that positive self-image. So we want to be working well with other people. We need to be maintaining our composure in some of these difficult circumstances. We want to inspire trust and respect. We want to avoid these inappropriate remarks, which includes on social media. And we need to respect privacy and cultural values. And there was some research done by Robin Prim in 2010, and she stated that there were 8 aspects of professionalism in nursing. And she kind of summed that up as teamwork and professional demeanor, integrity and trustworthiness, compassion and respect for others, responsibility and sense of duty, self-care and personal growth, accountability and initiative, continuous learning, and concern for the welfare of others. So these are things that as nursing professionals we should really be striving for and embracing, and it really does kind of define nursing. So as healthcare professionals, we're held to a very high standard of confidentiality and professionalism when it comes to our client information. So when nursing professionals use social media in connection with their professional activities, that's when our professional practice standards come into play. And if we don't abide by these practice standards, that can lead to some serious legal consequences, because we're obligated to adhere to our code of ethics and our standards of practice. So when we're looking at our code of ethics, it really states that LPNs maintain standards of practice, professional competence and conduct. We maintain those professional boundaries in the use of electronic media. We maintain the standards of the profession and conduct ourselves in a manner that upholds the integrity of the profession. So when you see people making remarks about saying things like, oh, well, LPN stands for low paid nurse, you're not upholding the integrity of the profession when you make those comments. And if you're viewing yourself that way, then that is how other people are going to view you. And then when we switch over and we look at our standards of practice, they state that LPNs practice with honesty and integrity to maintain the values and reputation of the profession, and we maintain professional boundaries in the nurse-client therapeutic relationship at all times, and that includes when you're using your social media. So there's certainly a lot of benefits to using social media when we use it appropriately, but more and more we're hearing of some of these incidents where social media has gotten people into some hot water. So I think that a lot of people think that as long as they're not posting inappropriate pictures of themselves or pictures of their clients they care for, then they're okay. But you really need to be aware of some of these more subtle mistakes that can get you into trouble and perhaps cost you your job or even your license. So these are some of the main issues that come up with the use of social media. So it's maintaining those therapeutic boundaries, upholding privacy and confidentiality, keeping a professional image, and practicing the duty to report. So we're going to discuss each of these a little more in depth separately. So maintaining therapeutic boundaries is the first one. So ensuring those professional boundaries, it's a foundational component of the nurse-client relationship. And when that's not maintained, there can be some consequences for the nursing professional. And when we lose that professional boundary, it creates some of these blurred lines between professional and personal relationships. So an example of this is perhaps you're friending a client or a family member on Facebook. And that can lead to a variety of consequences for people. So you can run the risk of damaging that therapeutic nurse-client relationship. So as an LPN, you're responsible for separating your professional life from your personal life, and the potential to damage this relationship is really high if social media is involved. You also run the risk of either party assuming that becoming friends gives some sort of consent to share information. So perhaps the LPN thinks that they can now speak openly about the client's condition, or maybe the client thinks that they can now seek medical advice from the LPN whenever they want, and that of course poses a risk for professional liability for the LPN as well. Or the client might even think that the relationship is moving past that nurse-client relationship into maybe more of a romantic situation. And then finally, you're running the risk of this unintentional sharing of personal information. So maybe you've got a client that's disgruntled and now they have access to you and your address. Maybe the team is short-staffed and the client is seeing photos of you out, having a good time with your friends or on vacation. Maybe you've got photos of you out having social drinks with your friends and the client starts thinking you have a drinking problem. There's just way too many scenarios where things can go wrong. And there's been incidents where people have posted things like, I'm having a crazy day at work, we're short-staffed again, what else is new, couldn't have gotten through it without my team. And the intention there is really to compliment the team and talk about the good teamwork that's happening. But it can become misconstrued if a family member sees that and then they interpret it as, well, what kind of care is my mother getting if they're short-staffed over there all the time? So it just sort of raises some red flags for family members. And another thing that happens quite often is people that working in long-term care, especially when a resident passes away, people are posting about it on Facebook. And you really have to be careful because you can't be certain that all the family's been notified of maybe this person passing away. And of course, the last place people want to find out about these things is on social media or kind of through the grapevine. So these are just a few tips to help you kind of maintain those professional boundaries. So as we said, we want to avoid accepting these friend requests from clients or family members of our clients. Because basically it's just a bad idea to be connected via technology with our clients and our client family members. And I can recognize that can be a challenge for people if they're living in some of these more small rural areas where everybody really knows everybody. But if you aren't already friends with someone, don't start. And if you were already friends with this person and then sort of find yourself in that situation, you might want to consider blocking them so they don't see all your activity online. We don't want to be providing health advice via social media platforms either. It can be quite risky because your advice might have a really negative impact or consequence. So if someone does approach you for advice, you need to just clearly state that it would be a professional breach for you to engage in this. And then lastly, we don't want to reveal our personal contact information to our clients either, because you really don't know when someone might confuse things for friendship or romantic relationships, and then you end up in a potentially dangerous situation, or clients think that they can just drop by and visit you anytime. So you want to make sure that you're terminating the nurse-client relationship once you've finished caring for somebody. And then our next one is upholding that privacy and confidentiality. So healthcare professionals are held to that very, very high standard when it comes to confidentiality and privacy. We've got a legal and ethical obligation to do so, and that's outlined in our Code of Ethics and our Standards of Practice. So these are a few real-life examples where this has been breached. So posting a client's first name and health information on a coworker's Facebook page, and nurse was found guilty of professional misconduct for this. Blogging personally identifying information about residents without consent and making derogatory comments about residents. A personal support worker was terminated from employment for doing this. And if this had been an LPN or an RN, they would have faced some disciplinary action from the regulatory body, and they may have even had their license suspended as a result. And then of course, posting photos of yourself at work that might reveal room numbers or patient records. So this is one that people don't initially think of as a problem when they're, taking that selfie at work. But right here in New Brunswick, an LPN was fired because of a photo they posted that revealed charts and room numbers. So the best rule of thumb is to not take photos at your place of employment. And you also have to understand that maybe you have like a common friend or acquaintance with somebody. It still doesn't give you the right to share information about them if you cared for them. So come across people say, oh, did you hear Stacy had surgery last week? I had her as a patient in the hospital. So that's not, you can't share that kind of information. So tips on maintaining your privacy and confidentiality, it's all pretty straightforward things. So we don't want to be sharing images from our workplace. We don't want to post or share clients' personal health information on social media. And you should try to enhance your privacy settings and keep your personal accounts private. Because often what we see as well is someone has, a connection with a resident or a client, and they take a photo of them and they post it on a site. And although they might be saying really positive things about that resident or that client, it's still not appropriate and you don't have the consent to do so. And we also see people taking photos of themselves at work. Again, you might see a resident in the background, a room number, a chart. It's just not a good idea for you to do this. And I think the meatiest part of this presentation is here about keeping your professional image. So this really is an area that has become a concern and where most complaints are coming from. We've seen a spike in this with recent events in our province. But as I said earlier in this presentation, it is in times of stress and chaos that acting professionally is most important. So the last thing you want to do is prove somebody's point if they're speaking of you in an unprofessional way. And in our second bullet there, it says numerous healthcare professionals have been sanctioned due to some of these inappropriate comments made on social media. So this is when we see some of these cases of defamation. And then these group discussions, stirring the pot, rumors, and incorrect information. So a lot of people are in these social media groups, and those groups can certainly serve to support and help nursing professionals maybe stay positive in some of these difficult times, but they're not the place for you to vent about a difficult coworker, a manager, the workplace, posting some of those inappropriate jokes and photos, degrading the healthcare system, degrading your role. Because that's what really stirs the pot, and then people end up getting more angry and more frustrated, and then it comes out in their comments and their posts. It leads to a lot of rumors. Sometimes there's incorrect information being floated around, and it gets people all hyped up when they really don't need to be. So these are some examples of how your professional image can be damaged, and in the next slide we'll talk about the consequences of this. So again, it's those defamatory comments, venting about the workplace, coworkers, managers, and policies, and posting some of those tasteless comments and photos. So these are some of the consequences and risks of displaying yourself unprofessionally on social media. So scope of distribution is a big one. Even though you think you're in a private group, you really don't have any control over who sees it and who might use it. So we do live in the age of screenshots, and perhaps somebody is taking a screenshot of a comment that you made or a photo, and then it gets shared with people that you didn't intend to see it. And that happens all of the time. The permanence of information, so information cannot be easily deleted. So even if you think you've gone back and deleted something, again, search engines can pick these things up. Somebody might have taken that screenshot of it and shared it in other places. A damaged reputation as well. So some of these posts that you may have made might come back to haunt you. So, one of the first things that employers do these days is check out your social media accounts for any kind of misconduct or inappropriate behavior. So those things can certainly come back to haunt you. And then, of course, there's disciplinary action, so fines, suspensions, termination, loss of license, and perhaps even criminal charges. Because in the end, the biggest risk you're posing is to yourself. So the biggest thing you want to remember is that you're always representing your profession and your employer. So you do want to practice some self-policing, and most importantly, you're representing yourself. So we always want to be presenting ourselves professionally. We want to be aware of our workplace policies surrounding social media. You don't want to be posting or commenting on posts that could be considered inappropriate or taken out of context. And we don't want to use social media as an outlet to vent some of our frustrations. Because that one tweet, that one post, even if you've gone back and deleted it, that can undercut your credibility rather quickly. So these are just some strategies to help you maybe maintain that professional image. So we want to always guard our reputation. We want to watch our language. So sometimes the language can be quite atrocious on social media. We want to monitor the privacy settings, and we want to keep our work comments positive. So again, making those negative comments about work and other people, it's just inappropriate and it can harm your reputation. And posting some of those tasteless comments that are meant to offend another person or group can cost you your job or your license at the end of the day. It has the potential to do that. And I come back to that defamation because it's really important that we understand that when we make those defamatory comments about another person or an organization on social media site, it can lead you being charged. And if you're found liable by the courts, you could be required to pay damages, lose your job, or lose your license. And I have a really good example of that we're coming up to that happened here in Canada. So lastly is regulated professionals. We also want to make sure we're adhering to our duty to report. So that is clearly stated in our code of ethics and our standards of practice. And we also have a practice document available on our website just called Duty to Report. And it's not about being a tattletale or a snitch or being a watchdog on people. It's about upholding your positive reputation as a highly respected professional, because it only takes one person to damage the reputation for everybody. So some examples of where you'd have that duty to report include things like if you see a coworker posting photos of residents to social media, or maybe you have a coworker that's complaining about their place of employment all the time, and you see that defamation of an individual or an organization. Or maybe you see that the coworker is breaching some client confidentiality online. So all of those things should be reported, because you also don't want to be seen as a witness to this and it's known that you knew this was happening and you didn't do anything about it, because that is part of our standards and our code. So this is the case I was referring to. This was a real life case that happened here in Canada, where a nurse was charged and found guilty of professional misconduct as a result of her actions on social media. So this occurred in Saskatchewan, and it's known as the STROM case, and some of you might be familiar with this. So I'll just kind of walk you through this case as an example. So the nurse's grandfather passed away in a long-term care facility in Saskatchewan in January of 2015. In February of 2015, she went straight to social media using Facebook and Twitter and said things like, "It's evident that not everyone's up to speed on how to approach end-of-life care or how to maintain an aging senior's dignity. Please get your staff a refresher on this topic and do better next time. If you have a loved one in this facility, keep an eye on them. As an RN, I have to speak up and advocate. It needs to be fixed." So these posts were reported by another nurse, and as a result, the nurse was charged with the following: violation of confidentiality, failure to follow proper communication channels, failure to obtain all the facts, and using their professional title for personal purposes under the Code of Ethics. So this all happened in January and February of 2015. So then in December of 2016, a full year later, the nurse was found guilty of professional misconduct. The staff at the facility testified that it was a humiliating and embarrassing experience. The discipline committee stated that she engaged in generalized public venting about the staff and facility and went straight to social media to do this. So again, we see that failure to use the appropriate channels, such as going to speak to management about it one-on-one. Freedom of speech was considered. However, it was noted that she used her credentials when she referenced her opinion. So in the previous slide, she said as an RN, so she was using her credentials there. And lastly, she had not previously taken her concerns to officials or staff at the facility before posting her statements. So if you do have concerns or questions, it's always better to ask the person or the place in question in person rather than venting online, to make sure you have your facts straight and you're following those appropriate channels of communication. So these are what the decisions were in her case. So her consequences were that she had to pay a $1,000 fine for professional misconduct and $25,000 fine for the costs of the proceedings. So that's quite significant. It was also decided that the comments needlessly harmed the reputation of the nursing staff. It undermined the public confidence and it amounted to professional misconduct. They stated that nursing professionals must conduct themselves professionally when communicating online. It was also made clear that they didn't seek to muzzle nurses from using social media, but to ensure that they conduct themselves professionally when communicating online. And then this was appealed, and the nurse lost her appeal as the court sided with the discipline committee findings. So all of this adds up to a very long process that costs thousands and thousands of dollars and a very damaged reputation. And this case is still going through the court system, and it was appealed again as recently as September 2019. So it's still going on today. So all of this being said, it's just really imperative that our nursing professionals keep our reputation in check by upholding that confidentiality and professionalism across all platforms, which of course includes the use of social media. So just as a little bit of a recap here as we wrap up, we want to avoid friending clients on social media or families of clients as well, avoiding revealing personal information to our clients. We never want to be sharing photos from our workplace. We never want to use social media to degrade, vent, or share negative information. We always want to be presenting ourselves in a professional manner. You certainly want to be aware of and follow your workplace policies surrounding social media. We don't want to be posting confidential information about our clients, and just maintaining your professional responsibility to report any unethical conduct that you might be seeing, so that comes down to our duty to report. Because if we become a little bit too complacent and relaxed on these topics, that's when we're really putting ourselves and our jobs at risk. So at the end of the day, the biggest risk really is to yourself. So I want to thank you for joining me today, and I'll stop the recording here now, and then we can have some discussion if anybody has some questions or comments that you want to talk about, and you can stay on the line and I will unmute everybody. I'm just going to stop the recording here.